All right, so I'm American McGee coming to you from Shanghai, China, at the studio where we built Alice Madness Returns, Spicy Horse. And today, this morning for me, we're going to be taking questions from you, the audience, about the project, about the development, and yeah, just about anything else you want to talk about. The first question I've got here is from Charlotte. She's saying that throughout the game you play as Alice, a girl, yet most of the adventure horror genre are associated with and marketed towards the male gender. Did you worry about the marketability of Alice and the sequel, Madness Returns, for this reason? It's a great question. It's one that certainly came up when we were building the first game. When I went and pitched the idea to EA, there was a lot of nervousness around whether or not a female lead could work in a game and not also have to be hypersexualized to appeal to that sort of male kind of dominant market. What we found is that it's not really so much about her being female or male, but just that she's very human. She's a very compelling character who evokes a lot of empathy in the people who are playing the game, and I think that that works whether you're a guy, a girl, or somewhere in between. So, I think the thing that we felt made her work as a character is when we were always true to her as a character, and that seemed to overcome the male-female issue. Next question is from Dalton. He's asking, was creating a new storyline for this sequel difficult, seeing as the first game provided a lot of plot from both of the books? We didn't really start to think about the story for the sequel until about 3 years ago, when we had the idea that we could do a sequel, where R.J. Berg, my creative partner, and I left off the story the first time around was there weren't a lot of loose ends, so we weren't sure if we were going to come back, but there was always this sort of mystery surrounding the death that killed her family. And so, of course, that felt like the first place we were going to start when we thought to do a sequel. And for me, the idea of the first game was that she had overcome her mental issues. Everything that was done in the first game had to do with the psychological, with the internal. And when I sat down to think about the story for the sequel, it was the external and the physical that I thought she needed to deal with. And so that's why this version of the story becomes a murder mystery and takes place inside of the real world as much as it does inside of Wonderland. The next question is from Ethereal Symphony. How did you find the production process on Alice Madness Returns as opposed to American McGee's American McGee's Alice? I do have some madness, but we weren't working on that today. So as opposed to American McGee's Alice 10 years ago, did you find you had more creative control this time around? That's an excellent question. I mean, the question of who has creative control is always an interesting one when you're dealing with a project where on the first game we had 35 people at Rogue Entertainment building the game, plus myself and RJ and a number of other external creatives helping out on it. This time around we had 75 people in our internal studio here in Shanghai, and another 50 people doing asset production, plus some external people doing concept art and so forth. I mean, this is always a creative collaboration. It's never a situation, at least for me, where you feel like you have absolute control. A lot of times we would joke that it's like a democratic dictatorship, meaning that for the most part, it would be run as a democratic process, and everybody would have a say. But every once in a while, I might have had to step in as a dictator and say yes or no about a particular decision. I can tell you, I think that happened probably less than 5 times throughout the production of the game. So I'd say that the creative input, the control, as it were, that I had this time was probably very similar to the first time around, because it's always about collaborating with your team. Next, we have a question from Sebastian. He's asking, who voices Alice and the Cheshire Cat? So this sequel actually contains the same 2 voice actors for those roles as were present in the first game. The woman who voices Alice is named Susie Braun, and she actually lives in the UK. And both with the original game and this time around, we recorded her remotely. So she would go into a studio in the UK, and R.J. Berg, again the writer on the project, would be in a recording studio in San Francisco and would give her remote direction and capture her lines. For the Cheshire Cat, it's a guy named Roger Jackson, who is actually quite famous in the voiceover industry in the U.S. He's done a lot of movies, like the voice of the scary guy on the other end of the phone in Scream is Roger, and also he's done things as light and cute as the Powerpuff Girls. And so he's in San Francisco. RJ is also in San Francisco, and my understanding is that Roger does not like to fly, so they also did the recording sessions there in San Francisco. The next question is from Fabian, or Fabian. Is it safe to say that all your future games will be twists on children's tales? Not so much. This Alice project was in some ways a sort of distraction from where the business we built here in Shanghai was intending to go. We wanted to be focusing on online multiplayer games, which is something that here in China there is no such thing as a 360 or a PS3. There are no retail games. It's all about online multiplayer games. And so, for our future, we're going to be doing a lot more free-to-play games, a lot more casual games. The themes of those may sometimes come back to the twisted fairy tales, but of the projects we have in production right now, one of them is based on Red Riding Hood. It's a twisted fairy tale, and the other two are not. So I think we'll always play around with the fairy tales a little bit, but I think it's also important for us as a studio to explore other genres and other themes. Now waiting for the next question here. This is Ashley asking, do you have to play the first game in order to understand the sequel? When we set out to make the sequel, we built it with people who had never played the original game in mind. We wanted to layer in enough by way of story and clues and narrative for someone to be able to play the sequel and enjoy it without having had to play the original. But partway through production of the sequel, we got the idea to include the original with the sequel in the box. So that means that for somebody who's just purchased the sequel, they also get a copy of the original game, and now they have no excuse not to play the original and then play the sequel immediately after. Or you could play the sequel and then play the original. Totally up to you. It's your game. We have next here Ashley. Oh, apparently I'm supposed to ignore something that just came across, but oh well. So how did you come up with some of the ideas of the monsters? Was it just a normal day and you looked at something and thought, hey, this gives me an idea for a monster from the game, or is it deeper than that? This is from Kayla. Actually, one of the things that would answer this question very well would be the art book that we put together, which you can buy from Dark Horse. It contains a lot of the experimentation and the different kind of playing around with ideas that our art department went through when they were working out concepts for the monsters. And what they did was take characters we presented in the first game, brought those back and reimagined them sometimes. They also went into the Wonderland books, the original books, and tried to find inspiration inside of them, and then brought characters we made out of the scene in the first game to life. And then there were also some places where they would experiment and invent new characters from scratch that had not been mentioned in the books and were not also in the first game. And that was really the task of our concept art department, which was led by our art director, Ken Wong. And at the time of production, we probably had 7 or 8 people working in concept art, and so they were just creating tons and tons of concept art every day, and then we'd go through a review process and select pieces of that we thought would be appropriate for the game. So from Leona, can you clarify on the timeline of Madness Returns? I've heard it's supposed to take place 11 years after the event of American McGee's Alice, reflecting the real passage of time, but that Alice is still supposed to be 18 or 19 years old. So this is a great question, something that is actually a little bit annoying to me because I've seen the press misrepresent this quite a few times, and I did spend some time to think about how the timeline worked in relation to Alice and her age and her time in London. So where we wrote it was that after leaving the asylum, she's then going to spend 1 year living in London before we meet with her at the beginning of Madness Returns. So to Alice, since leaving the asylum, only that 1 year has passed. I know for us, in the real world, 10, 11 years have passed. But the year is supposed to be 1875, and that's still supposed to be an 1875 that's relevant to the Alice Liddell that you know in the books. So that would put her age, I think, around 19. I'd have to go back and look at the spreadsheet that I did, but we actually mapped out her age and the time in the news and the music and all the things that were happening around her during that year, so that we could fit all that into the game and fit all that into her mind. So this game takes place in 1875, and I believe at that point Alice should be 19 years old. And you'll be able to see that in the influence of the news pieces and the music and things like that that are prevalent in the game. Next question comes from, boy, I'm going to mess this up, Ashlyn, I believe, or Ashy Lynn, or I don't know. Anyway, what inspired you to have the sequel set so many years after the first Alice? See, now you just are. I just answered this question. Actually, we didn't want to have it be so far after, so it's been 1 year since the original. Maybe you're asking also why did it take us so long to come back and make the game, but that was really just a matter of being at the right place at the right time, and nothing very magical or special about it. Next question is from Charlotte. Are there any designs for places in Wonderland based off of real locations on Earth? If so, please give examples. Yeah, this is another place where the book from Dark Horse is actually quite cool because you can go into that and see the design work and the thought that went into building London. And so we actually did spend quite a bit of time looking at the layout of London during this period, during 1875, and we also worked to recreate the structure of the geography of the city at that time. So if you're traveling around in the London sequences, you'll notice that St. Paul's is in the right location, or the Thames is in the right location, the London Bridge, that these sort of landmark places that are on the horizon for Alice, those are positioned correctly, and also that the neighborhoods she's traveling through take inspiration from and are geographically correct in terms of location to London as it was back then. So we have a question from Rose. She's asking, how do you come up with all the different weapons used throughout the game? Again, a great question, especially as it relates to the first Alice game. With the first Alice, we had this concept of toys as weapons, and actually the concept of toys as weapons really led the design more than the gameplay considerations that would normally go into designing a weapon system. Meaning that we thought it was a really cool wrapper to have toys as weapons, but we didn't really take it much further than that, and so these weapons really just ended up being sort of damage spewers. This time around, because of the feedback that we had about the first games, the kind of one-dimensionalness of the combat system, we decided that we would spend a lot more time designing the weapons system first, designing the mechanics for the weapons first, and then put a wrapper on top of it. And so this time it really became about making sure combat was as satisfying and strategic and interesting as possible, and then just finding an appropriate wrapper for the weapons. And so that meant that by the time we had the weapon systems understood, we then again had the concept artists go through and draw up just a lot of different creative ideas of things that we could wrap those weapons in, and really kind of trying to follow this one constant rule we always had of things in Wonderland needing to be inspired by experiences or sights or sounds that Alice would have